Welcome everyone to the Allen Heath deep dive session for the dLive consoles. Thank you everyone for coming. This is part of our TC Furlong virtual Digital Console Expo 2020. Thanks for being here. I'm Brian Grahn. I'm with the TC Furlong sales and marketing team. Today we are joined by Pat McConnell and Michael Bangs with Allen Heath. Hey guys. We also have Sean from Audio Biz hiding in the background somewhere. There he is. Thanks for being here, guys. Today we're going to be talking about the dLive console. So first things first, we are going to be presenting this as a webinar, but we're going to be using the Q&A feature. So if you have any questions, please ask them as we're going along, and we can kind of interrupt the presentation and we can get on a tangent potentially. You know, we want this to be a discussion with everyone and not just a presentation, a one-way presentation. So please use the Q&A feature to ask your questions. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Pat McConnell first.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. And thanks to the TC Furlong crew for putting this party together for us. We're happy to be part of it as we've regularly participated in the Console Expo. This is the 10th year and it's a celebration and we're rocking it. So thanks to all of you who have signed on as our guests for the dLive Deep Dive, right? Say that 3 times fast. Happy to talk with you for an hour tonight about the dLive series products, which have just been an overwhelming success for Allen & Heath, and it continues to grow. To tell you a little bit about what we've got going on, as Brian mentioned, this is presented as a webinar, but we do want it to be an interactive Q&A type of thing for you. I believe there may be the availability to ask audio questions in addition to the chat. To introduce my partners in crime, as Sean waved into the picture, I'd like to have Redbeard, seen as how he's kind of a local legend, stand up so that we can actually see him. He's an audio legend in the Midwest, so happy to have him as part of the team and the Ampersand twins here. It's a little scary when you put a couple of mix in a bunker with a refrigerator full of beer. We'll see what's happening. Jeff Howley is our guru of marketing, and he's in the chat, and he's going to help answer questions as they come up. We're going to talk with you guys, take questions, and try to direct this. I do want to give a brief little overview. I'm going to show you a couple of slides, talk a little bit about the technology, and I also am super honored to have Bangs, as we affectionately refer to him, and he likes to be called Bangs. Mike Bangs is our touring and support engineer worldwide for our dLive series product, and this guy knows more about it than anyone in our organization. So it's wonderful to know that I didn't have to pack my own parachute, that he's got me no matter where I jump. So it's pretty awesome. So what I'd like to do quick is just give, for those of you who are in the call and need a little bit of background, I'd like to jump over and show you just a couple little slides that I've got on some of the dLive technology, some of the differentiation that we have. So Sean, if you'll bring that up for me, I'd appreciate it. Nice slide. Oh, by the way, if you didn't know it, Allen Heath makes mixers, and we've been doing it for 50 years, right? It's what we do. dLive itself, what is dLive? These are some of the features that set us apart. It's 96 kilohertz sampling rate. It's an audible difference that is differentiated technology from our competitors. It's a sub-millisecond throughput for all of the audio in the system. It's always phase aligned and it's mixed coherent. This gives us a better sound. Back in the day, for those of you who worked on big analog consoles that sounded pretty, things happened with phase coherency. We have built that into our system, and we can talk at length about that, but that is one of the big differentiators. The architecture of a dLive system, regardless of what the hardware looks like, is always the processor that allows 128 external sources to mix, and we've got 64 assignable mix outputs. Those are assignable and user definable, okay? Also, we've built 16 stereo mix engines into the desk. This is based on what we call our XCVI core. And this is a differentiator for us. This is our latest generation FPGA technology. What that is we have the FPGA processor. It's a 36-core parallel processing setup that allows us for this incredible capability. Here it says power for 160 channels. That's the 128 plus the 32 channels of stereo effects returns, if you count it all up. But the idea is this is something that our competitors have not yet delved into. We've written this code, we own this, and it gives us a leap forward in design. So I'll save you from all of the details, but as we talked about previously, the class-leading system latency and this configurable output bus architecture that we have built in, that XCVI FPGA core, okay? I'm not going to go through all of the details on the recent feature additions, but we continue to add features to our dLive series product, and those are always rolled out in free firmware updates, right? What I would like to cover is to give you the overview that we have two classes designed into the dLive, and they're all the same family, they're all the same processor, and they all play well together, and you can interchange types and classes. What this gives us is the capability to do something in S-Class, which was designed for the playground that Bangs has always lived in, and that's world-class touring, right? The idea was build something that can't fail. We want to make sure that we put redundancy into the most likely failure points of a touring system. Those are typically, in whatever the components are, either a power supply that could fail or a cable that could fail, right? So our network connectivity in the S-Class has redundancy built into all of the components, and the power supply capability can be built in as redundancy as well. The C-Class was a call that came second after we introduced the S-Class, like, hey, we're installing this in an occasional use theater or a house of worship application where it's used 2 or 3 days a week. We really don't need all the redundancy. Can you make something that's a little bit smaller? Can you give us a couple more offerings in the chassis type as well? So we have the C-Class that that works as well as the S-Class in the dLive, and that gives us a wider product offering. So in the picture that we show you here, the big dog consoles, the ones with the most faders, are all the S-Class, and we can get smaller versions of those as well. And then the C-Class, we can scale those back a little bit if that's more of what people are looking for. If we look at the S-Class, this is kind of what I covered. Tour grade surface and racks, both, right? 3 different surface sizes, and some record and play capability from a USB drive, all 2496 on there. And that's the big dog, which is the S7000. We have an S5000, which is the next step down, and the S3000, which is the S-Class redundant version, just in a smaller scale. And in addition to that, the units themselves in the S-Class Surface, we've got a boatload of features. We won't cover every detail, but local inputs and outputs, digital inputs and outputs on the Surface itself. And remember that this is just one of the components, right? Separate from the rack. And then redundant GigaAce connectivity, and then capability for DX-Link, which is one of our protocols for I/O box expansion. You're going to hear us talk about our everything I/O ecosystem as we have throughout the day, and that's part of what works and what makes dLive unique. So I/O ports on the back are actually slot card I/O, so if you wanted to, you can expand, and we play well with others. If you wish to have connectivity for another surface or another rack or a system, we can pop in a GigaAce, which is our protocol, which is our proprietary protocol. That'll give us connectivity to our own systems, or if you wish to connect to other systems, whether it's Dante, or if you wish to have Maddie, or if you want to pop in a Waves card, you can have connectivity via other networks and other protocols as well. And as I say, we play well with others. So an additional network TCP/IP controller connections on there. That's a separate network protocol for wireless connectivity or for some of the IP controllers and other mechanisms that we have for control. Word clock, which is important for lots of folks these days, USB and a VGA output as well, and redundant power supplies on it, okay? In the racks, we've got 3 different size racks, so whatever you need, and you can scale that up, right? We've got 32 by 16. Our outputs on our dLive racks are half of the number of gazintas. You get half of the gazautas, so 32 ins by 16 outs, 48 ins by 24 outs, or 64 ins by 32 outs, and there's additional connectivity for DX ports on those racks as well. And then we've got more configuration for additional slots on the racks themselves. In a S-Class system, you have 3 slots on the racks, and you have 2 on the surfaces. We also have this little darling, which is our DM0. And this is an S-Class mix rack that is super affordable. And we'll leave it for the TC folks to quote the prices to you guys tonight. But this gives you the slot card and the capability with expansion ports for DX connectivity, all in a small, rackable powerhouse of a little box, right? This is the entire engine and everything built into it. And then you can add what you might need. So for portable or fly rig systems, this is a class leader in the entire industry. Also, built-in internal redundant power supplies on the DM0. So DM rack tour, I think we kind of covered a bunch of this. I won't go through all the details for you. We covered what's there. Just to speed things along, I'll jump through. Oh, important point, headphone output on the rack itself. So if you need a second output, you're not at the desk, you've got it here. Or if you're doing a fly rig and you want to control it with software, you've got a headphone output on the rack. So everything's there. The C-Class, as we talked about, now that was S-Class. C-Class, this is the largest surface we have, which is a DLC 3500 or the C3500 as we like to affectionately refer to it. This is 24 faders, 2 touch screens, super impact resistant and just beautiful. Work great in every environment that you could ever hope or dream of working in. And programmable soft keys galore and 6 layers for each one of the faders and 2 independent banks, or they can work together. We've got one of those here as the demo unit. I can show you around on that a little bit. We also offer a DLC 2500, has a single screen, but all of these desks have a VGA output for a second screen if you wish to connect it. And yes, I said VGA, not HDMI. The good news about that is they're available worldwide if you are touring. And the other part is it's much less expensive. It's still 1080 resolution, and it's easier to find a monitor and a lot less expensive. So those are built into the back. Soft keys are the same on this single capacitive touchscreen on the 2500. And then we've got the little one, and this is the DLC 1500. And Bangs, when I hand it off to him, he's got a cool little product announcement that he'll talk about with its what I would say now is its tougher brother. We'll leave it at that. Yeah. We've also got the C-Class racks. Now there is a slight difference in the C-Class racks. We talked about C-Class is compact and does not have the redundancy. Physical port differences. There are on the Surface, as we discussed, there's only one I/O slot for a card. On the racks, there is one slot for a card, which gives you 2 for the system, but slightly reduced from the S-Class. You can mix an S-Class rack with a C-Class Surface or vice versa. So whatever you'd like to do, everything plays with everything like that. So whatever you can dream up, all the components work, and you can grab a show file. I borrow show files from Sean all the time, and I put him through all kinds of work locally and say, dude, can you give me that? Because I just want to use that for a demo. It doesn't matter what my components are. I can drag it out and lay it out however we need to. And because Sean is also the local rep for TC, I thought it's pretty important for you guys to know that there is Shure wireless integration built into the dLive series, right? If you want to monitor and see battery life accurately on what's happening for every one of your I/O setups, and I do know that TC does a boatload of rental for wireless stuff, both locally and nationally, so the dLive plays well with all of that. So that's a quick little overview, and what I'd like to do, if we can, is we'll just slide over to cameras for a moment and show you. I've got a wonderful playland set up in our little virtual booth. Have we got anything that we want to interrupt with at this point, Sean, or are we good?
No, we're good.
Okay, great. I've got this set up, and it's a distance shot. Don't worry, I've got closer shots as well, but I've got a C3500 set up. This one is a DM32, so this is an S-Class rack that I have here, and just to show, hey, this all works well. And for fun, for a little peripheral work, I've also included some of our IP controllers that we have, and if you can see it on the screen, I'm using this little sidecar mixer, this little 8-fader PoE Plus unit that we can actually use as a standalone mixer or as part of the dLive system. I've also included an IP6 here that I have at my fingertips. And then we have what I will have to show as a close-up. Can you give me this one, Sean? Let's see, that would be there. And if I can cue it up. This is an IP1, and forgive me, my PoE switch was needed elsewhere in our setup today, but this is a little single gang box that's assignable that you can put functionality into an installation or just wire it up to a box if you want to give somebody local control at a podium. So whatever you think is great and easy. So in what I have here to play with, give you a quick little overview. But before I do that, let me pass over to Bangs and see if there's anything that he'd like to jump in with at this point.
Sorry, it'd be better if I was unmuted. No, I think that tells the story. I think really the important part of this story here, without getting too bogged down into each individual piece, is the fact of the super comprehensive nature of this being a true ecosystem. It's the only system like it out in the market where you have so many choices of things that can stack together to build out the system, whatever to suit whatever your needs may be for your particular application. As a longtime touring mixer, I was constantly confronted with systems where you can have this console or this console. This one does this many channels. This one does slightly more channels. Which one do you want? With a dLive system, I can completely customize the entire rig, from the engine to the control surface to peripherals and ancillaries, completely around whatever I'm doing. And I'm also not locked into it. I can take my one show file, my one configuration, and I can move it through dozens or hundreds of different hardware configurations without losing any channels or bus count or features. It's the only platform like that on the market. And we've seen a lot of hardware features, but we also have a lot of software control options, from iPad apps to Mac and PC control software capabilities, things that you can do on your phone. So there's just an unprecedented capability and flexibility for building out a system to suit a specific need, whether it be doing live shows or whether it's installation. And the good thing is that the amount of hardware and software options that we have could be a little daunting for someone that deals with a lot of manufacturers and a lot of different products. But that's why we have a very large team of over 100 people in this country that are very familiar, and our friends at TC Furlong are very familiar with our products. So we're here to help you. So don't get I know there's a lot, and it's too much for any normal human to remember. So remember that we're here to help you. We can take a napkin drawing of a wish list and turn it into a beautiful line drawing with, your custom artwork on it, whatever you want to do. So we're here to help, and that's the thing that I wanted to mention.
Awesome. All right. So if we take it from that, to talk a little bit more about it, we've got an hour today approximately. So we'll give you an introduction to the technology, show you some hands-on with it. We can go as deep as you want to go down the rabbit hole, because there's nobody that's going to stump Bangs with any of the questions. And the other part that we have, though, is I want to talk about ongoing, like Bangs says, we're here to help you all of the time. We have humans that still answer a telephone. If you want to talk to somebody as tech support during business hours, which are slightly expanded, we have tech support at our 800 number that's always available. You have support at AmericanMusicAndSound.com that's available all the time. You have the TC Furlong team that's available and will answer the phone for you all the time and talk you through things. And if they don't know, they've got support through Sean and I locally. So this is an ongoing conversation, and it's all about learning, and it's about using the tools and having a great time doing it. The part that I think is fun about the dLive system, and I volunteer in a couple of locations where I actually have the fortunate use of being able to work regularly, both with the equipment that I sell, but most importantly, help other people using the equipment that I sell, that it's great because I've got guys in the field that can talk circles around me technically. I have to sit down and actually think about it or go to my resources for help. But I also do know that regularly, as I'm training volunteer teams, this is an easy product to work with. So don't feel overwhelmed. If it is your nature to go dive deep, then let's dive deep. But if not, don't panic. It's easy. We'll get you through it. So that's ongoing support all the time. Let's talk a little bit about what some of the setup and some of the features look like on a dLive. I've got the 3500 set here. And if I go to an overhead shot on this, Just to show you on the two screens that I've got, both of these are interactive. And then I can give you a quick close-up of what we've got here. And just because people have a tendency to want to see like, hey, what are the bells and whistles? What's really cool about it? How many effects does it do? All that. I'm not going to dive into every single feature, but to give you the idea, something that's really useful is to give an overview of what happens on the desk itself. So if I jump to the overhead, we've got everything that you need for control surface capability. We make our products out of metal. We use machined aluminum and steel. We don't use blow molded plastic. This thing is built for the rigors of the road. It's like a tank, right? Fabulous touch-sensitive buttons that are really effective. Everything that you'd need and that you would expect as mute keys and functionality. But what's really, I think, fabulous and useful in what we do is that we have a drag and drop configuration in the desk. So if I were to, I'm going to jump this over to the other screen, and I'd like to show you how fast and how easy we can drag and drop something over on this desk. So if I go to my Surface and I go to Strip Assign, which is, let me see if I can get this just a bit closer. How's that showing up, Sean? Can we see that all right? Yep. All right. So what I've done is to jump out, you guys, to give you an overview. I'm on the right-hand screen, which is where most of my programming is done. I've got all the important buttons here on this side. And if I go down and I'm working on either the mix rack or the surface functions, and I want to go to this surface, and I'm going to go to a strip assign, and I'm going to hit this menu under control, and I literally can go down. I'm going to go to the bottom one here, and as you can see, I only have one thing laid out on that bottom channel. I have, if I jump over to the top view, you can see that I've actually gone to, did I get it? All right, good. I've got all gray here, and then I've got one highlighted section. If I jump back and I want to just show how I can drag and drop things from the main section here down into the space, and it could be anything. I could grab, let's say, hey, I want channels 1 through 8, and I can grab them in a group, and I can drag them and lay them out. But then if I decided that I wanted my drum DCA right next to it, take the block select off here. If I want to drag one DCA next to that, and then mostly because I think that it's really beautiful, I want to have a group channel because I decided to color it blue. There's no reason or rhyme to what I just told you, don't worry. But the idea would be that I've laid this out the way that I wish to have it.
Can you scoot your camera over
just to the right? Yeah, you bet.
Right,
okay.
so they can see that.
Yeah, you got it, man. Thank you very much. Okay, and if I jump back up to the overhead now, did I get it?
Yep.
Great. Then you can see that I've got everything laid out just as I wanted it. Now, I'm just going to keep it on the overhead. You guys can see me. I just decided I changed my mind about a couple of those, and I want to actually drag something else into that space. It's that fast and that easy, okay? So you lay out this workflow in whatever layers or type you wish to see it in. So I always make the joke, I can assign any layout the way that I want it, and I'm left-handed. And the cool part about this is I can set consoles up with the DCAs on the left side of the console. And I've got friends that kind of twitch when I do that because it makes them really uncomfortable. It's like, dude, that's all wrong. I'm like, no, it's not. It's perfect. I'm left-handed. So, and if you want to get really exotic about it, you could have that scene recall assigned to a soft key and you could just bring it up and make it magical, right? But that is one function that I think is a total differentiator and a game changer as an introduction to dLive. The other part is, as I'm still over on the overhead here, if I go to the Mix Rack button here, the first menu that comes up under Configuration and Mixer Configuration, this is what allows me, as I said, that you have 64 output buses on a dLive, and you can configure the console to be anything that you want it to be. So if the important part here, if I switch over, is right now it says that this is left, right, and mono sum. But if I decided that I wanted it to be a 5.1 surround, a true 5.1 surround rig, then I can just configure the console as that. If I just want it to be a left, right, or if I want a left, center, right for the show that I'm setting up, or whatever that looks like, you can configure the console. And what that does is it actually reprograms the FPGA chip to be the functionality that you want so you can assign it in any way capable. I'm not going to do that in this moment. It takes about, I don't know, 45 seconds, a minute, depending on what the configuration is. It does interrupt the audio flow. We don't do it during show, right? I warned you. But when you configure the show, you do that at the beginning of the show, not in show, right? There are ways to do all kinds of crazy things in show, but not reprogram the FPGA, right? But that is a unique functionality that we offer in a way that I think is completely capable. In I guess there's no courteous. I was trying to be nice about it. It's a huge limitation for other systems, right? And we're trying to grow our way out of those. So that's basically how do we lay out the gazintas? How do we configure the gazoutas? It's all there for you. So to poke a little bit on the surface and to move this over again, see if I can get it. All right, good visibility. Is that all right, Sean?
Yep.
Okay, cool. If I go back to my overhead, as I'm working in these systems, and now you know how I've laid these out and I have multiple layers of things to play with. This is fairly traditional on the mix side. If I grab any channel, I can select it from here and I can work on it. I've got a highlighted functionality screen that this is where I use for most of my mixing. So if I grab, depending on what the bank of channels is, and it will change as I change with it, this is the things that I'm working on to be able to mix. And if I switch over to the other side, you didn't see me on the overhead, but I hit one of the DCAs, it shows me the window for the right-hand side of the console that I'm working on where I've got the DCAs out, and this gives me whatever my input list is for my DCA layout. So if I jump back to one of my input channels, just to give you a quick idea, you have access to everything that's one layer deep. You just touch the screen. So forgive me if I say buttons, because I have a tendency to get confused on which console I'm on. And now with the dLive and the Avantis, with these enormous touch screens, we don't have as many buttons. I'm a little old school, I'm learning, but I'm slow to change. I can grab my preamp section, and as you see I did that moved from my bank section where my view was and dove right into my preamp. Now, if I like that interface, wonderful, but if I'm working on the same channel and I know I want to GAC the preamp and I want to jump over to the parametric EQ, I can do it either way. So it's kind of, forgive me, this is a little vulgar, but I say there's more than one way to skin the cat on a dLive in almost everything that you do. And if you love cats, I'm really sorry that I used that analogy.
We do have one question here.
All right.
Let me switch you to the screen so you can see it. Basically, can there be multiple mono, stereo, left, right, center, 5-1 channels programmed into the control surface, or to be controlled at one time? Beauregard saw the different configurations of the buses on there. So I don't know if you want to answer that one, or if we want to have Bangs answer that.
There's only one main bus at any given time, and it can be any one of those options. You have many other opportunities for other types of stereo and mono buses. For LCR and 5.1, it's only going to be the main, and there will only be one main bus at any given configuration.
All right. Okay, so Bo, that answers specifically what happens for the output bus. But if what you needed to do was I want to have multiple output mixes, you have one main mix, but we could assign whatever else it is that you needed. If you needed, like as an example, Bangs is the touring engineer. Why don't you tell him how many mixes you can have as output totally from a dLive system?
Well, you can have 64 buses, but those 64 buses can feed 824 patchable outputs. But normally what we would do is you would have one main bus, and then you would feed those into a series of matrices, so that you have one main bus, but you could have a separate matrix for your main line array cluster, and then a separate matrix for your front fills on the stage, and a separate matrix for your lobby feed, and a separate matrix for anything, backstage green room, any of those kinds of things we would generally do with matrices. And so you can feed all of those things from your one main bus. You can also augment those matrices. So your front fill matrix could be your main left right mix, but with more vocal. Or your lobby feed could be more. You could have your left right mix, but have an extra input put in over the top of it. So you can augment those in any way you need. You can also obviously use auxiliaries to have completely discrete mixes. But I think the question was, can you have multiple 5.1s or multiple stereo mains? And the answer is no.
Yep. Right on. Thanks, Banks. You rock, buddy. So, Bo, thanks for the great question. And Sean, I just brought this up. I don't know if you've got it handy, but if we can show this. When Banks is talking about how you can have as many matrices as you want, that there's a maximum of 64 bus outputs, remember that in this configuration, it's not just what we choose for a main, but literally what we take for additional mixes. So what we call auxes could be assigned out as either mono auxes or stereo auxes, which can translate into other mixes, or as Bangs had said, you can set up matrices as well. So those are just, however many you want, either in mono and or stereo. You can choose whatever you decide you want. So that's user definable and user definable. So that was great. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Okay, so good question. As we were talking, just to jump back, we're only one layer deep on everything that we want to get into for the input sections, and we've got separate tabs for access to any individual part of that I/O section from the bank view or the overview as well. So vertically on the screen or horizontally across. And if we jump through some of that stuff, just to cover it for you, this was a good question that's come up in all of our Q&A stuff today, and that's, hey, what processing is included on every I/O that's on a dLive? Different manufacturers call it different things. I don't think that you should need to assign an effects slot to something to be able to use an EQ, right? An EQ should be included. I grew up in analog days, right? We've also included, if I jump through it in the bank, just to give you the visual, we've got a preamp section. We've got all kinds of capability for visual metering. We've got readout for your monitoring for your Shure stuff. We've got a gate built in, so the gate function is built into every I/O. And this is a fully functional, professional, transparent, gorgeous sounding gate with, you can set up the sidechain source on it independently, and there's some great functionality along with, for some reason, I've lost my audio signal on this channel. Oh, let me go to a channel I've got some audio in. That'll make it better. Now you can see lights blank. And the idea would be that if I pop a gate in and raise a threshold to where it's working, you'll see here that whether it's in or out, we've got a histogram at the bottom of it, and that is, it's actually working when I have the gate out, and it sort of tells me preliminarily, oh, I got to get a gate on those timbales. This sounds horrible. This will tell me, where is it? Is it kicking in? What's coming on before I engage the gate? So it's super functional. So that's, if we jump back out, we've got a gate built into every channel. We've got a high and low pass filter, so easy to deploy, and that's on every input. In addition to that, if we keep going through it, we've got 4 bands of parametric EQ. This is probably one of the worst looking EQ curves you've ever seen in your life, right? But we don't care what it looks like. It's just, or what I should say, worst sounding EQ curves you've ever seen. But right now it looks beautiful on the presentation. In addition to that, as we jump back, we've got 4 bands of parametric. We've got a fully functional compressor, and that could be manual or peak RMS, and that could be chosen from the library for you. Input with the same thing that we would have otherwise for, I didn't grab a good channel for demo on this, but let's try it there instead. Histogram, once again, to give you what's going on with your dynamics processing. And this is the stock stuff, excuse me, as I'm jumping back and forth between things. A manual or RMS compressor that comes in, this is just the default setup. It's the most transparent that we have, and they're super functional. We do our own modeling and our own design for all of our plugins. And the cool part of that story, a couple of you guys might have heard that earlier today, is the managing director of our organization is a gentleman by the name of Dr. Rob Clark. And he is beyond brilliant. He's a gentleman, but he's just a bloke. He's fun to have a beer with. He'll talk gear with you until you're blue in the face. And he does happen to hold a PhD in digital signal processing and manages our entire organization worldwide. And he's also the guy whose propeller spins so fast that he loves to put the touches on the modeling for the plugins that we design. Like, this has been his passion, and that passion comes through the whole company and everything we do. So if we look through some of the library for what we have available for plugins, if we wanted to, we could have something that's super cool and looks exactly like an 1176, right? And the fun part of this story, a couple of you guys may have already heard this from me before, but this is modeled on the 1176 that we borrowed from Olympic Studios from London, which happens to have the 1176 that was in Abbey Road. And when they brought it over, it was in this, like, you know, practically armored car kind of case thing. They bring it over and go, well, that's awesome, thanks, guys. And they're like, well, we didn't know which one you wanted, so we decided we'd bring both. You could have either the black or the silver face. Which one do you want? So we modeled both of them, and they are slightly different. But so not only do you get these cool models, but you get the cool models of the specific piece that sounded that way. And we do all that work ourselves. Another one that is current for us and has been just amazingly well received. For those of you who might recognize what that is, if you have a studio background, if you ever worked on an LA2 compressor, we put the Optronic together, and this is just an astoundingly great sounding piece. And it took quite some time for developing, and Dr. Rob was involved in this very, very heavily. So, you know, that's the kind of stuff we hang our hat on. Now, as we talk about plugins, I want to make sure that I also throw out that we play well with others, right? If Waves is your thing and you can only do your stuff because you've always used Waves, I'm not down on you. If that's the way, those are the tools you like to use, I think our best path is to say, hey, you design what you like. Here's a way to be able to incorporate your Waves rig. Just throw a Waves card in either the rack or in the back of the Surface, and you can run your server with it. Now, I invite all of you to evaluate a dLive. Call the guys at TC and say you want to set one up for a few hours and you want to hear what it sounds like. We'll get you some tracks and you can play with what's there, and that you can actually see that you may reevaluate when you start listening to some of the plugins that are native in the desk. Because the cool thing about this is you can use every plugin we have in every slot, in every place, on inputs and outputs, and they're always that same throughput, that sub-milliseconds throughput. It doesn't change for us. And that's a huge advantage. When you start talking about using something with IEMs or fallback and you want processing on it, the last thing you want is multiple arrival times, right? So that latency and that what we call mix coherency, all of that phase coherency is built into the tools as we provide them. Now you can add Waves plugins and you add some latency by doing so, which we all know about the Waves plugins that will do that. But this is a huge advantage for us in keeping that phase coherency for you. Bangs, you've done, your background is world touring. Why don't you talk a little bit about the differences you hear when you use dLive in something when it comes to phase?
It's funny because I had a world-class engineer last week that has a very popular YouTube channel, and he presents a lot of his audio theories on his YouTube channel done on a dLive. And based on his experience in mixing huge artists around the world, he wanted to do a class on how using different bus structures and different paths through a console can be very problematic and damaging because of the phase interactions. He set up on his dLive and he started doing it, and none of those negative things were happening, and he was a little confused. So he sent me an email and he said, hey, I was going to do this video on all the pitfalls of taking different routes to the console, but I don't hear any phasing in your desk. And I said, absolutely, you won't, because it is a mixed coherent console. So you can go from inputs to mains. You can go from input to group to mains. You can go from input to group to mains to matrix, and without changing your phase relationship, without changing your overall system time. That's incredibly important, because if I want to subgroup my drums, and this is the example he was going to do. So if you take drums and you send them to a group, and then you also send them directly to the mains, when you put that group into the mains, on every other console that he and I have ever mixed on other than dLive, you would have an arrival time difference, a phase shift. So the inputs going through the group would get to the main mix later than the other ones. And so that offset in phase gives you a dramatic change in frequency response. And so you're basically getting unintended EQ, and it's usually not pretty, EQ. And I watch people do this all the time, and we've helped you out with that with dLive by zeroing those things out so that you can keep your phase relationship. I would much rather have a good, and I know I'm not alone in this, many of the other big console guys, Robert Scoville is a big preacher about phase relationship, really good friend of mine. I would trade a good phase relationship for any of the other tools. If I can have good phase, I can mix much more effectively than I can with, you know, things coming and going at different times. So, you know, I agree with Pat. You know, Waves makes a lot of great products, but you do need to be careful because they do shift you around in time. And we tried to alleviate that problem for you by giving you compressor tools, giving you graphic EQ tools, giving you preamp modeling plugins, things like that, that don't change your overall system time and therefore do not change your phase relationship. It just really makes things a lot easier. I see so many engineers shoot themselves in the foot by just putting too many things in and that they think are magic solutions, and really all they're doing is they're slurring their mix into a giant mess. So phase is what I think to be the most important thing. And then the other side of that coin is overall system time. And you know, if you're doing front of house, you may not care about your overall system time. As a monitor engineer, it's incredibly important because I have to be really cognizant of the signals that I'm feeding, especially to singers and horn players are probably the most dramatic because their instrument actually resonates in their head. If you feed them a 3-4 millisecond late signal, which I see people try and do all the time, it's very displeasing. Imagine, you know, someone standing 4 feet away from you and repeating everything that you say in your exact voice all the time. It would drive you insane. So let's not do that to our performers. You know, by using a dLive system, or you know, by paying attention to your overall system latency, you know, you can bring that distance much closer, and it's a much more pleasing experience for performers. And you know, that it makes your job easier when they're happy. And we have to remember that the console is just one piece of the puzzle. So, you know, if you've got our next closest competitor is almost double our latency. And I won't call them out a name, but most of our competitors are more than double and often 3 to 4 times our overall latency. So you think about, you know, that is your starting point, and then you're going to have other processing possibly. You're going to have some sort of in-ear system or monitors that have gone through amplifiers that have digital processing in them, and you're just stacking latency. If you're going to shoot something through a Dante network, that's significant latency. So you've got all these different links in the chain that are going to add up. And when you have your front end with such a low starting point, it gives you a lot more wiggle room for other things in your chain. So latency and phase relationship are crucial to what we do, and I think just far too many people ignore them.
Awesome.
I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, dude, that was awesome. I really appreciate your input, and thanks for your expertise. So specific to some of that functionality, one last plugin and one thing that I think makes a big difference for us in latency is if I grab a channel here, and I'm just going to grab a bass guitar channel for this as an instance, I'm going to jump into my insert on that channel. I have a couple of insert points, either before the EQ in the comp or after. Thank you, Sean. And what I've done is I've actually grabbed an insert point, and I have inserted in this a Dyne 8. So I have a multi-band dynamic section that's included as a plugin that is like a super compressor and beyond. In addition to the multi-band 4-band compressor, we also have a 4-band dynamic EQ. So if you haven't worked with something like this where it's a multi-band compressor and or a dynamic EQ, think of, most of you know what a compressor is, and Sean, I've got a visual for this. I've been working on it all week. Can you give me some camera? So if we know that compressors do this, right? Let's see, if this is our signal, right? If it's from 0 to 100 dB, and then we want to put a compressor on it, we know what that's doing is it's actually, I don't know if this is showing up great for the camera angle, but the idea is that the This hand is our full dynamics. This one is squashing it by 50%. That's a 2-to-1 compression ratio, right? Now we can do that multi-band so we can slice the sound up. So if you haven't worked in this is extraordinary. But the biggest huge point that I wanted to make about this multi-band dynamic section is we have that without latency. It's not adding delay. Everything that Bangs just talked about is inherent and built into it, and you can use that in the processing that you send to talent or that you send to output, and you don't have to recalculate and try to figure out what that is. So, and it doesn't delay anything. It's astounding. Now, the other part is the the dynamic EQ. We talked about the multi-band compressor, but in addition to that, you can focus in on a specific EQ point. Now, compression squashes things, right? It changes tonality sometimes because you might squash a level, but it doesn't really eliminate my example, and Sean knows this because he's actually mixed me while I'm playing. If I grab that old P bass over there, and I'm really into it, I'm hitting it way too hard. I think I'm John Entwistle for you guys that are old enough to know who that is. And what that does is it's just the clack of the pickup. But Sean goes, I can deal with it. So what? It's him. I'm used to it. What he does is he puts a notch in at that and uses the dynamic EQ that says on the bass input, let's take 1K down when it starts to hit a certain point. So instead of compressing it, it's actually changing the EQ. That's built into our Dyne 8, that functionality. So that's a real simple analysis of what you could do with one band, but it's multi-band. So when you can tune this in, we've used this in a church environment that Sean and I play in, where you can actually use it to roll off potential feedback frequencies from a very, very quiet presenter or pastor, where they start to turn their head and you get that little zing. As soon as 8K starts to lift, we put the dynamic EQ in and it takes it back down and you never hear it. You know you almost did and then it's gone. It's like, oh. So those type of tools are built in. 64 instances of a Dyne 8 are available in a dLive. You don't have to order it, so easy to go. Aaron?
I've got a question.
Or I'm sorry, Brian?
Yeah. Can we talk about dLive mix rack and surface configurations? I know this has been sometimes hard for me to wrap my head around. With the mix rack is going to be handling the I/O, but how you might be able to share inputs and outputs maybe between a front of house and monitor depth, if you would ever in any case share a mix rack, or how you would be getting the audio paths between the two consoles.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Thank you. Bangs, would you like to jump at this one?
Yep, I'll take that one. Thank you. So we do have the capability to share mix racks. If you want to do it, give me a call and I'll talk you out of it. The system handles it just fine, but in my experience, most operators, especially in education, house of worship, where you probably don't have lifelong audio engineers, the operators struggle. It's a very advanced operation and kind of an abstract concept. It's obviously completely up to you. Sorry?
And that's sharing one mix rack with two control surfaces is what you're talking about, right?
Yes. The way that I like to think about it is having multiple keyboards and mice on one computer with two people trying to drive one desktop, with multiple. You could do it, but most operators would struggle. What we can do, and which is a more common application, because there's no other system out there where you can have multiple controllers on one engine. It just comes from the fact that dLive is very unique in that this thing here is not the mixer. This thing behind me is just a keyboard and mouse, basically a really cool one. But the mixer itself, all the math is being done, all the audio processing is being done in the rack. Whereas in every other system on the market, the rack is just a place to plug in inputs and outputs. So we have that difference there. So what most people are looking to do is to share inputs and outputs, not share processing. And that we can do just as well, if not better than anyone else. The most common way to do that would be over a GigAce connection. And that gives you a sub 5 sample transport time, which is much, much faster than any other protocol. I mean, Dante is great for what it does, but its latency is significantly higher than that. So when you're just trying to move things around, GigAce is a really good option. It's also incredibly stable and predictable, and you don't need any third-party control or configuration. It's all done within the mixer. So the common configuration would be a DM or CDM with the bulk of the I/O on it. So you would say, do a CDM 64, and then a GigaAce card in that, and then a second engine, and that second engine could be another CDM64, it could be a DM32, or very commonly it's a DM0, so that you're just getting a separate processor because you don't need additional analog I/O. And then, so the second engine would also have a GigaAce card. Those two GigaAce cards would connect one to the other via Cat5, which can be a redundant connection if you wish. There are 2 ports on each card, so you could run 2 cables and have full auto switching redundancy. And that card-to-card connection gives you 128 channels each direction to and from the 2 services. So you basically have 128 sends and returns. So anything that's on one system can be on the other and vice versa. So I can use physical outputs on either rack from either system, or on either surface for that matter. I could plug something into the back of this surface and have it come out of the other surface on the other engine just by tie lining it through. So that's what most people are trying to do. We have a lot of people that phone up or email or text that say, hey, I want to put 2 surfaces on one rack. What they mean is that they want to share I/O. And on every other system, if you're looking at a competing system, you would have 1 rack because it's just I/O, and then 2 mixers. We do the same thing, we just do it a little bit differently as far as hardware configuration. So that does seem to trip people up. But once you wrap your head around the fact that the rack is the engine, then if you want 2 mixers, you need 2 racks. And it's also worth pointing out that even with the second rack and all the other configurations, we still do regularly price out significantly less than our competitors, even competing systems with less capability. So don't be afraid by the fact that there's an extra piece. It's not gonna break the bank on you. So
right on.
Yep.
Sure.
Hey,
And
one
so I've got
last thing
another.
one last thing I'd like to throw onto that. Bangs had spoke specifically about a lot of what we can do with dLive. Just as a reminder, not only will our dLive systems pair with other dLive systems, but they'll work with Avantis or SQ as well, and that technology is an easy link with that GigaAce card that you would add to the dLive system.
Yes, we have a lot of systems going out now that are one of each, a dLive at front of house, an Avantis at monitors, and a SQ at broadcast. Or you could swap all those around. I mean, there's no right or wrong way. And that was the point that I tried to make before, is that dLive is itself a huge ecosystem, but dLive is also, and its entire ecosystem is only one part of the greater Allen Heath ecosystem where everything all plays nice together. And so you have a tremendous flexibility in footprint and budget and capability, all while keeping in one family, one technology stream, one training for your team. So, sorry, you had another question, Brian?
Yeah, and my follow-up question is, now we're talking about, we have a control surface and we've got our mix rack, but say you do have some additional surface that you might want to incorporate with that. I'm aware you guys have some IP interfaces, maybe some smaller fader banks that you can add into a dLive system.
Yep, Pat showed the IP8 and the IP6, and there also is the wall mount single gang IP1. Those are really great options. They can be used as standalone controllers. They do require an engine. It's not a mixture of its own. It's just an IP control. It's basically a mini surface. And I've seen those used for broadcasts in House of Worship. That's a really great application where you might have a dLive engine and surface running the mix in the sanctuary, and then you can do a discrete broadcast mix on a stereo aux or a matrix if you choose off of the IP8, and you can put a laptop or an iPad in front of it so they have some visual interface. That is a really common application where you can keep dLive sound quality and capability and processing and keep your budget really low while still getting a discrete broadcast mix. But I've seen them, we've been using them for the NFL at Fox Sports. I've seen them in boardrooms. I used to fly without a surface, with just an engine and an IP8 as my tactile controller. And for anyone that's wondering, why in the heck did we put the engine in the rack instead of doing what everyone else does? We didn't do it to be contrary. We did it because it opens up all of these possibilities that you don't have. If this is my mixer, this thing it's fairly large and bulky. There are places I can't go with this. It doesn't fit in my car. I can't, carry it upstairs. I can't take it on an airplane. But if I have all these other options and I just have the engine, then I can take it anywhere I want to go. I can roll it out in the parking lot. I can, and it gives me a lot of flexibility. It allows me to do things that no other system allows me to do. And that's why we switched it that way. And since we're talking about it, I do want to point out this guy.
Yeah.
This is our new offering. This is our dLive C1500, CTI 1500, excuse me. Pat showed earlier the regular C1500, which is in itself a feat because up until, we still have the only large format mixer, and I have to air quote large format because while this is a traditionally large format mixer, it is very small in footprint and weight, that would be in a case under 70 pounds, which is where most people want to be for checked baggage. But we took on a challenge to make a large format mixer that could be in a proper road case and come in under 50 pounds or under 23 kilos. That's the free baggage allowance of most airlines internationally. And there are some European airlines that do not allow baggage over 23 kilos. So we took on that challenge and we came up with this new CTI 1500. It's got titanium sides and base. It is a beautiful piece of machining artwork. And this allows you to have a fully capable 160 by 64 mixer at 96K that can do any stadium show on the planet. And it comes in a proper road case under 50 pounds. So you can take it anywhere on Earth. So it's pretty extraordinary. Here's another photo of it. It is on the website, and the order book is open, and they are shipping now. So speak to your TC Furlong sales engineer about that.
Brian,
cool.
I think there's something new that you guys need to add to the rental inventory, huh?
I know. It looks very snazzy for fly days, especially.
Right on, right on. Hey, I know that we're kind of getting close to the time. Could we spend just a couple more minutes talking about, I'd like to talk about control of the system. You led us there with the IP stuff, but we've got another avenue that I'd like to head down a little bit. So we've talked about surface, right? We can have whatever size surface we want, as big as we want, down to the titanium, right? So whatever you'd want for a single dLive system. And we know that we have the IP8 and some of the IP6 and the IP1 wall mount controllers. Those are mechanisms. We haven't mentioned it, but we do have a full mix control that's available for tablets. We have individual mix controls available for tablets, and that's really big and popular for corporate or house of worship or a lot of things in that. But I think Bangs has got a rig set up with something it's not brand new for us, but it's relatively new, and it's become an amazing part of our ecosystem because this works with dLive and it works with the Avantis. And this is my blatant plug for our deep dive tomorrow night for Avantis that starts at 5 p.m. again. So please join us for that. Just sign up on the link with the TC crew. It's great. But Bangs, do you want to take a couple minutes to talk about custom control?
I just so happen to have a slide on that. What a funny
Imagine that.
So custom control, I love bringing this up because it is a lesser known thing. And you may not have heard about it, mostly because it's free. So, which is a shame, but this is an app that we offer. We do have 2 other iPad apps along with our regular Mac and PC control software. So there is an iPad app called MixPad for engineers. There is a personal monitor mixing iPad app called OneMix, and they're fantastic. But custom control is yet another tool in the dLive ecosystem. And again, it's free. So it starts with a Mac or PC editor where you would build custom controls. And I think most people are familiar with Crestron, Extron, and AMX. Thank you. AMX control systems, which are really wonderful control systems. But you know, that's another ecosystem that you may not have the budget to or may not want to buy into. So we wanted to give you some of that same control and functionality in the dLive system. So custom control with very simple drag and drop, almost like a Microsoft Paint kind of interface, you can build custom graphic user interfaces for your users, and they can be deployed on any device. So it can be Mac or PC, can be Android, iOS, tablets, phones, literally any device. We call it BYOD, meaning that it doesn't have to be a specialized device, BYOD for bring your own device. And this allows you to have a customized, simplified control, what I like to call non-skilled user interface for people that probably aren't audio engineers. So for a pastor or a teacher or a principal of a school or a company executive, things like that, that just need simple control, and you can make these look very attractive and make your install look very high end without any additional cost. So as I said, it starts with the Mac or PC build software. You can use any kind of JPEG or PNG, any kind of artwork. You can custom color anything. All of the buttons can be resized. You can have custom keycaps, any font you want. So you can build these out really however you want very quickly. So I have a couple options here. This is just one that you would do for standard, very simple level control of multiple inputs. There are some scene recalls across the top too. So you have buttons for different scenarios, like, a wedding or a party or watch a movie, those kinds of things. This one is even more simple. So this could be on the wall in a conference room where you just have a few different zones that you can turn up and down, and you can choose from 3 sources. So that's another option. This is an interesting one that I built for just as a demo for a client, for an integrator that had a unique scenario where the musical director of the worship team wanted to be on in-ears, but be able to queue up or PFL anything in the system, including other band members' mixes, listen to the house mix, all those kinds of things while he was floating around the room. And so I built this in custom control. It's just a big page of PFL buttons. And so from here, they can PFL anything they want. And this goes to a discrete PFL that only feeds into their ears. This does not disrupt anything that's going on with the main operator out front and their PFL system. So there's a lot of unique applications that come up. This is another one that I built just to kind of prove the point, where I made the fader caps people's faces, and the lower knobs are people's faces. So you could take a picture of a guitar and make that a fader cap. So if you want the guitar louder, push it up. If you want it quieter, pull the guitar down. So you could literally make an interface that you could hand to a 5-year-old and they could manage your event for you. So custom control gives you an unprecedented opportunity to have simplified control. And again, it's just one piece of a much bigger picture where, literally your imagination is only the limits of an Allen Heath audio system. And again, we're here to help.
Awesome.
That's great.
Hey, just a quick reminder for everybody, everything that Bangs just told you about, the custom control app is free. The programming software is downloadable from our website. It's free. If you want to play around with it, you can. If you want to figure out how to use that and what you want to use that with, reach out to the TC Furlong team. If you would like education on how to use that software, we offer it through AmericanMusicandSound.com is our website, okay? Or if you just hit the website and say, send something in, talk to the TC guys. Say, hey, where can I learn how to do this? They'll help you out with it, and we'll give you that kind of support, and the support and the education is free. So as opposed to having to go in and get some certified class for a bunch of programming and a chipset installed in your forehead so that you can use a control system, how about just build this into the cool rig that you're using when you're going to go out on tour, or you're going to use it at the church or whatever else it's going to be. We'll make that available. And then the other part is, hey, I've got a dLive system. I want to actually try an IP controller with it. How does that work? You call Brian, or you call the TC team, or you reach out to us, and they'll help you get the tools that you want to be able to work with.
But it really is incredibly simple. I couldn't do a Crestron interface if my life depended on it. I've tried. And I am not a graphic designer. I can't find my way around Photoshop or Final Cut. I just downloaded it with no instruction And I figured it out in 5 minutes and whipped out that one with the faces on it in just a few minutes. So it really is simple. And so is putting on, yes, and same thing with putting on IP controllers and things like that. It's all done in the Surface, and it's very easy to do. We did have a question about version 1.9. It's our very widely anticipated next firmware update for dLive. It is coming very soon, but it is coming next year. There will be, the good news of waiting for it till next year is that there's going to be a tremendous amount of new features on board. We're adding Sennheiser support. We're adding nameable tabs in the I/O screen. So there's a lot of, I'm not going to go through the whole list, but there are a lot of new features coming in version 1.9. We've got some new compressor plugins coming. So it's going to be a huge, impressive release. And like every release that we do, we don't put it out until it's right. And so look for that next year. And thanks for the question.
Awesome.
That's great.
Awesome. So are there any questions is there anything that's left unanswered at this point?
I don't think so. Looks like the Q&A is clear here. I will say, if anyone does have any questions after this, feel free to email the TC Furlong team at sales@tcfurlong. We can get Pat or the rest of the Allen Heath team involved here if we need help on a special technical question. I'd also want to point out, Pat is going to be joining us again tomorrow for a deep dive with the Avantis series, as well as on Thursday with a deep dive for the SQ series. So if you have any interest in that, you can sign up for those webinars at the digitalconsoleexpo.com website. And we'll see Pat again here tomorrow. And we appreciate you guys coming out for today.
Absolutely, man. Thank you very much. And hey, thanks to Redbeard here, the local legend. Thanks for all the good work. Thanks to the TC team. And Banks, thanks for spending your time with us. It's awesome having you, man.
It was a blast.
We appreciate
Thanks so much, everybody.
being out here. And Pat,
Anytime.
thanks for everything.
My pleasure.
All righty. Thank you, everybody.
Have a good afternoon.